On 19th-century maps, the name Tartary labels vast, undemarcated territories of Asia, a sprawling enigma stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific. To the cartographers of the era, it was a geographic descriptor, a placeholder for lands not fully known or politically defined by Western powers. And yet, a curious phenomenon appears far beyond the borders of this supposed empire. Across continents, from the historic city halls of Europe to the administrative buildings of a young America, a striking uniformity of ornate, old-world architecture persists. Official histories meticulously document this as the natural, organic proliferation of styles like neoclassicism and Beaux-Arts, a story of nations and cultures sharing, borrowing, and iterating on celebrated designs. The story, according to the archives, is one of distinct and well-documented origins, a clear and traceable lineage of architectural inspiration. But a different narrative interprets this uniformity not as coincidence or shared taste, but as the faint, architectural echo of a single connected global civilization, one deliberately erased from the ledgers of history. Proponents of this view point to compelling physical anomalies, grand buildings in disparate, unconnected cities with ornate windows and majestic doors resting inexplicably below the modern street grade. Geologists explain this through the mundane, gradual raising of city levels over centuries, a process of debris accumulation, repaving, and new construction layering over the old. The alternative theory, however, posits a single, cataclysmic event, a great mud flood in the 1800s that simultaneously buried the foundations of a global empire under meters of soil and sediment. It is crucial to note that no geological evidence for such a synchronous worldwide flood exists in the stratigraphic record. Yet the questions persist, written in subterranean stone and brick, fueling a narrative of a deliberately buried past. At the very center of this discrepancy, sitting in towers of stone and steel, are the bells. Housed within these same imposing structures, from cathedrals to clock towers, we find bells of immense scale, often weighing many tons. They were cast with a precision that remains a marvel of metallurgy, a testament to a highly sophisticated craft. Their function is recorded in civic and church records with unwavering consistency. They were instruments of communication. Their chimes marked the passage of time, called communities to worship, signaled joyous celebrations, and sounded alarms for fire or invasion. The sound was their purpose, their voice was their function. But a different interpretation asks if their primary function was not acoustic, but physical. It questions if their specific metallic composition, their enormous size, and their placement in tall towers, often crowned with copper domes and spires, was all engineered for a purpose rooted in physics. This hypothesis suggests these were not merely musical instruments, but powerful nodes in a global network, engineered to harness and transmit atmospheric energy. The core concept, that of structures interacting with the atmosphere, is not without precedent. We know that sound possesses physical force, capable of shattering glass. We know that tall, conductive structures, like lightning rods, can safely interact with atmospheric electricity. The Tartarian theory, however, takes these known principles to a scale for which no supporting hardware or credible documentation has ever been found in mainstream scientific sources. It posits that the bells were not just bells, but resonant chambers, meticulously tuned to the Earth's own fundamental frequency, the Schumann resonances. This geophysical phenomenon, a set of spectrum peaks in the planet's electromagnetic field, is very real. However, the claim that the mechanical vibrations of a metal bell could couple with this planetary resonance to generate usable, transferable energy is not supported by any peer-reviewed science. The buildings themselves, in this view, were transformed from simple shelters and civic centers into magnificent, ornate power plants, and the bells were their engines. To support this extraordinary claim, researchers of this lost history point to maps. They assert that when you plot the locations of major cathedrals, bell towers, and other so-called Old World structures, you find not a random scattering but deliberate alignments. They see ley lines and geometric patterns, a vast grid suggesting a meticulously planned infrastructure, not the organic, often chaotic growth of urban centers. Critics in academia and science identify this as a textbook case of apophenia, the innate human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random or meaningless data. The locations of these structures, they argue, followed logical and predictable lines of trade, population density, defensible high ground, and access to fresh water. From a conventional historical perspective, no secret energy grid is required for their explanation. Their placement is a simple matter of human pragmatism. Attention then turns back to the bells themselves. Proponents of the Tartarian narrative claim that the intricate grooves found on some old bells, and their specific, often proprietary alloys, sometimes said to contain trace amounts of precious metals like gold and silver, were not ornamental, but were functional components of a sophisticated frequency generator. They argue that the skill required to cast such massive, acoustically, and, they claim, energetically perfect objects surpasses even modern capabilities. It is true that historical bell founding was a high craft, often a closely guarded secret passed down through generations. However, centuries of detailed foundry records document their purpose as entirely sonic. The meticulous attention to alloy and form was all in service of creating a pure, resonant tone that could carry for miles. The notes are consistent with musical, not electrical, aims. If such a revolutionary technology, free, wireless energy for all, did exist, the narrative requires a powerful motive for its complete erasure from history. This is where the story of a lost history transforms into a narrative of active conspiracy. Proponents point to widespread historical accounts of bells being confiscated and melted down en masse, particularly during times of war. They argue this was not simply to provide bronze for cannons, as the official histories state, but was a systematic and calculated campaign to disable the planetary power grid, plunging the world into an age of energetic dependence. Historical records from countless nations do indeed confirm the melting. During World War I and World War II, the reclamation of valuable bronze was a documented, widespread and patriotic practice of mobilizing all available resources for conflict. It is recorded in government ledgers and munitions factory inventories. It is not, however, recorded as a conspiracy. The alleged motive for this grand cover-up is, in a word, control. By erasing the knowledge and the infrastructure of free energy, a new paradigm of metered fossil fuels, centralized power plants, and patent-based electrical systems could be introduced and monopolized. The world, according to the theory, was intentionally transitioned from a state of technological abundance to one of engineered scarcity. Scholars who have studied the rise of the Tartaria narrative, however, see it not as a recovery of lost facts, but as a distinctly modern myth. It is a story that reflects a profound discontent with the perceived injustices and inequalities of the contemporary world, spreading not through dusty archives, but through the frictionless networks of the digital age. We are left then with two competing histories. One is found in academic journals, university archives, and peer-reviewed archaeological reports. It tells us that Tartary was a name for a place not yet fully known, that architectural styles traveled with people and commerce, that bells were cast for sound, and that their destruction was a tragic but understandable consequence of war. This history is built on mountains of verifiable cross-referenced evidence. The other history exists in the anomalies, in the questions the first history refuses to ask. It posits a magnificent lost empire, a world of free energy drawn from the sky, a golden past buried under mud and deliberate falsehoods. While no credible, empirical evidence supports this version of events, its power as a narrative is undeniable. It reveals a deep-seated desire to believe that a better, more equitable world is not a dream for the future, but a memory of the past. The real mystery, then, may not be what the bells were for, but why the story of them as a lost technology is now so powerfully resonant. The sound does not fade as it should. It gathers somehow beneath the dome of our modern imagination,